The theater was packed. 500 people watched from their seats and over 2 million more watched live online. Then the famous singer's voice cut through the room. "You, the kid in the back. Get up here." 11-year-old David Williams froze as the spotlight found him. His hands shook as he stepped forward, the crowd whispering, cameras closing in. The singer leaned close and whispered into a live mic, "Don't embarrass yourself." What happened next wasn't just a performance. It was the moment a carefully built lie began to collapse. The question is, how did a child expose a superstar in front of the world? Comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And subscribe for more powerful stories that demand to be heard. Before that night, David Williams was just another quiet kid trying to stay invisible. He was 11 years old, small for his age, with a habit of lowering his eyes whenever adults spoke too loudly. He lived in Compton with his mother and 2 younger siblings in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where the heat only worked in one room, and money was always discussed in whispers. His mother worked overnight shifts as a nurse, coming home exhausted but determined, reminding her kids every morning that surviving came before dreaming. Music was the one place David didn't shrink. He had been singing since he was 5, standing in the second row of the New Hope Baptist Church choir every Sunday, copying harmonies by instinct. By the time he was 7, the choir director, Miss Johnson, noticed something unusual. She once told his mother, quietly but seriously, "Your son hears notes most people can't." David didn't know what perfect pitch meant. He just knew that singing felt like breathing. At school, Jefferson Elementary, music was treated like an extra, something easily cut when budgets ran thin. David practiced anyway, humming softly at night while his siblings slept, replaying vocal runs he learned from old YouTube videos on his mother's cracked phone. He never talked about it. Talent didn't feel like something meant for kids who wore discounted uniforms and worried about grocery money. Then came the letter. Jefferson Elementary had been selected to perform as background vocals at a high-profile charity gala hosted by Chase Hendricks, the singer everyone called the voice of a generation. For the school, it was exposure. For the parents, it was hope. For David, it was terrifying. Backstage at the Orpheum Theater that afternoon, the choir was told to stay quiet and out of sight. David wandered too close to the stage during sound check and heard something that didn't sit right. Hendricks' voice was strong until it wasn't. When the song reached its famous high note, the sound changed. Too clean, too perfect. David froze. He didn't say a word. He told himself it wasn't his place. But hours later, under blinding lights and millions of eyes, David realized the singer hadn't called him on stage by accident. The moment David stepped into the spotlight, the air in the theater changed. What had been polite excitement turned into something sharper, more uncomfortable. 500 people leaned forward in their seats, trying to understand why an 11-year-old boy in a cheap uniform had been singled out. Cameras zoomed in, phones were raised. Online comments began flooding in before David even reached the center of the stage. Chase Hendricks smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was control. He announced loudly that David would sing solo, framing it as generosity, as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But the way he stood back, arms crossed, made it clear this wasn't kindness. This was a test designed for failure. David could feel it in his chest. He hadn't been asked, he had been chosen. The band started playing Higher Ground. The same song, the same legendary note. David's mouth went dry as the opening chords echoed through the theater. He glanced toward the choir risers where Miss Johnson sat frozen, her hands clenched together. She knew this song. She knew what it demanded. And she knew no child should be thrown into it like this. As David sang the first lines, his voice was soft but steady. The audience murmured, some looked surprised. Others looked bored, waiting for the moment he would crack. Chase watched closely, not worried, not impressed, just patient. He was waiting for the climb. When the melody began rising, David felt his heartbeat in his ears. He remembered what he'd heard during sound check earlier that afternoon. He remembered the way Chase's voice had fallen apart when the backing track was lowered. He remembered thinking he must have imagined it. But now, standing there with nothing but a live microphone, David knew he hadn't been wrong. As the song approached the bridge, Chase stepped closer to the sound engineer's station. The backing track swelled, louder than it needed to be. David hesitated for half a second, long enough for the crowd to sense something was off. That pause became dangerous. David stopped singing. The music faltered. Confusion rippled through the room. Chase turned sharply, irritation flashing across his face, but David spoke before he could be silenced. His voice shook at first, then steadied. He asked if the backing track could be turned off, not rudely, not accusingly. Just a question. The reaction was immediate. Laughter, gasps, a sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the audience. Chase dismissed it as nerves, then as ignorance, insisting the track was part of the arrangement. But David pressed again, reminding him quietly that he'd sung it without the track earlier. That was when the mood shifted. Chase's smile tightened. The room went still. Cameras zoomed closer. The audience sensed blood in the water. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply asked Chase to sing it first, to show him how. For the first time that night, Chase hesitated. When the backing track was finally cut, the theater felt exposed, stripped bare. Chase began singing confidently, writing muscle memory and years of applause. The crowd relaxed, believing the moment had passed. But as the notes climbed higher, tension returned. His neck stiffened. His breathing changed. And when he reached for the note, the one that had built his career, his voice cracked. The sound shattered the illusion. A wave of shock rolled through the audience. Phones shot up. Whispers exploded. David didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply stated what everyone had heard. The frequency didn't match. The note wasn't there. That was when the sound engineer stepped forward. His voice trembled as he admitted the truth. Every show, every night. The track had done the work Chase couldn't. Silence fell so heavy it felt physical. Chase tried to regain control, barking orders, threatening jobs, but it was too late. Then he turned back to David. If the boy thought he was brave, Chase decided he would be tested. No warm-up, no track, no safety net. Sing it, right now. The entire theater held its breath, because in that moment everything rested on what an 11-year-old black boy would do next. The room went silent as David stepped forward again. No music, no backing track, just a child standing under a spotlight meant for legends. The band waited, unsure whether to play. Chase Hendricks stood off to the side, arms folded, convinced this would end the same way all humiliations did, with the kid failing and the crowd moving on. David's chest rose slowly as he took a breath. His hands were still shaking, but his mind was calm. This wasn't about proving anything anymore. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about truth. The band began again, softer this time, stripped down. David sang the opening lines carefully, grounding himself in the melody. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, pure in a way that immediately cut through the room. People stopped whispering. Phones steadied. Something was happening. As the song climbed, David didn't rush. He didn't force it. Each note landed cleanly, effortlessly, as if his voice had been waiting for permission all along. Chase's expression shifted. Confidence gave way to unease. He had heard this tone before, during sound check. From a distance he thought no one noticed. When the bridge approached, the tension became unbearable. This was the place, the impossible note, the one Chase had built an empire on. David closed his eyes, then he reached it. The note came out clear, strong, and unmistakably real. No crack, no strain, no digital sheen. It rang through the theater like glass, sharp and beautiful, filling every corner of the space. People gasped, some stood without realizing it. David didn't stop there. He held the note, then pushed higher, into territory Chase's track had never touched. Chase staggered back as if struck. The illusion shattered completely. The song ended in stunned silence before the room exploded. Applause thundered. Shouts echoed. Online, the clip spread faster than anyone could process. David stood frozen, unsure if it was over, until voices from the front row cut through the noise. Yolanda Carter rose first, tears in her eyes, calling it the most honest thing she'd ever heard from a child. Marcus Webb followed, his voice shaking as he admitted he'd helped mix the album. He confirmed what David had exposed, that the note never belonged to Chase. Then the sound engineer stepped forward again, louder this time, refusing to be silent any longer. Chase snapped. He lunged toward David, grabbing his arm just hard enough to assert control. The gesture was caught on every camera. "We're done," he hissed. "You don't know what you've just done." David didn't pull away. He looked up, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I didn't lie," he said. "I just sang." That was the moment everything broke. Security moved in. Reporters surged. Chase was pulled away as the crowd turned against him, chanting questions he couldn't answer. David was led off stage, heart pounding, unaware that his life had just split into before and after. Because as the theater erupted behind him, one truth became impossible to ignore. The lie had been exposed, but the price of telling it was only beginning to unfold. David didn't understand the full weight of what had happened until much later. That night, he sat backstage on a folding chair, his feet not touching the floor, while adults argued in hushed, urgent voices around him. The theater that had erupted in applause only minutes earlier now felt cold and distant. Chase Hendricks was gone. The spotlight was gone. What remained was the quiet after truth is spoken and the fear of what comes next. By morning, the video had spread everywhere. Headlines didn't talk about a performance. They talked about exposure. Sponsors began distancing themselves. Industry insiders who had stayed silent for years started coming forward, confirming what David had revealed with nothing more than his voice. What had been dismissed for decades suddenly became undeniable. But the consequences didn't fall evenly. David and his family faced scrutiny they never asked for. Strangers questioned his motives. Online voices tried to turn a child into a villain for daring to challenge power. It was a familiar pattern. When a black child speaks truth, the system looks for a way to punish the courage instead of the lie. Still, something had changed. People who had once been invisible found strength in what David did. Session singers stepped out of the shadows. Producers admitted their silence. Audiences began asking harder questions about authenticity, credit, and who really pays the price when truth threatens profit. What happened on that stage wasn't just about music, it was about who gets believed and who gets silenced. David returned to his normal life, same apartment, same school, same church choir. He didn't become famous overnight and he didn't try to. He just kept singing, because no one could take that from him anymore. The difference was that now the world was listening. This story isn't about destroying a career. It's about exposing a system that relies on intimidation, silence, and the assumption that a black child won't be believed. It's about how often injustice survives simply because it's never challenged. One voice changed everything that night. So the question isn't whether David was brave enough to speak. The question is, when the truth stands in front of us, will we have the courage to stand with it? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about truth, justice, and the fight to be seen. Don't forget to hit the like button. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.